Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies Podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is
Jeremy Morris. Yeah, I'm a professor of media and cultural studies at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, yeah, which is located in Madison, Wisconsin. And I'm also just been appointed the faculty director for the Center for Humanistic Inquiry into AI and Uncertainty. So happy to talk about that too at some point beyond its extremely long name.
I was going to say you're one of my guests whose titles and qualifications won't fit onto a business card, but then nobody has a business card anymore, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, we just call the center AI and U now. We realized we had to shorten it. So
Yeah, I think that was a good first move as director. Prof, I've got a query for you that I pose to everybody, which is to ask what's currently dynamizing, impeding, interesting, preoccupying you. What's going on, Prof?
yeah, no, I love this question. That's a great way to start. And I don't know, maybe it's I like woke up with a toothache yesterday, and I was thinking about like the like singular kind of pain that toothache pain is. But I think if you talk about like impeding me, I'm turning 50 in about a month's time here, so like that's just aging and body has been on the mind in that way a lot. Um, and then I guess in terms of like exciting and dynamizing, like yeah, some new roles happening at the university that are exciting, and some new projects that are sort of putting me back in touch with people that I haven't talked to for a while or haven't collaborated with before, but have connections with people that I really respect. So that's been a really exciting part of what's going on too. And then yeah, I don't know. I was just helping my son like figure out how to buy groceries for the first time because he's moved out of the dorms at his university and is now trying to live life. So that was a kind of exciting, like you realize, oh yeah, I thought I had maybe imparted some more wisdom over the 18 years, but still got to walk him through the process of getting groceries.
I love that. And of course, we live in a world where generally dental care is not covered by health insurance. So
Uh,
Bernie Sanders made this point only yesterday.
yeah. No, it's
So the
a
pain you're suffering can also be monetary. Right?
it might be.
But I take your point about the business of getting groceries. This is quite a challenge. And he, of course, grew up in his early adolescence during COVID, when getting groceries may well have become a thing done at a distance anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There was definitely a few times where I think we had to do this sort of order online. I also just remember doing a lot of uh, masking, going to the grocery store, and then like an intense kind of washing ritual, when you come home from the groceries. And some of that has obviously stuck. But yeah, it's interesting to think about the kind of like practices and the way they shifted during that time, um, and then like what practices have continued afterwards. So
I worry deeply about folks from your son's cohort and later, and earlier, about people who never had the college opportunity
yeah.
that they expected,
Yeah.
about
Yeah. I
people
mean,
who missed out on socialization at crucial moments in their development and so on. And I'm sure this is being studied academically, but every pedagogue I speak to about this says it's clear that people suffered in a variety of ways that resonate still.
yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think he was sort of end of middle school and first years of high school that were COVID for him. And then I have twins who are a couple of years younger than him. So they were last years of um, e- elementary school and then into middle school. And, you know, I I think I'm hoping that it was sort of they were just young enough that they still had some experiences, certainly through high school of like connecting and that. The students that were online in university for that first whole semester, that was sort of definitely a different crowd. But yeah, it's definitely been challenging in the classroom to kind of get people used to just how it is to be talking to other people on a regular basis. And that's probably also partially because of the way the US is at the moment in terms of like politics. Things are quite tense. So I think also just there's always this thing of in the classroom of sort of can I relate to this person? How am I going to do that? And of course, that's the business of I think like going to class and being in these positions, right? But it has become a pretty large barrier, I think, in some ways for conversations.
You mentioned your new job running an artificial intelligence segment. One of the things that interests me in the United States is the return of the Blue Book,
Yeah.
which had been abandoned. These Blue Books, for those from outside the country, traditionally where handwritten exams were done, abandoned in favor of electronic diversions, now charging back. Here in Mexico, they're brown books. And the brown books are very much like the blue books, being used in class every day to ensure that students interact with the subject matter that's imparted in the class. Meanwhile, university bureaucrats and true believing Kool-Aid swilling advocates of artificial intelligence and pedagogy tell us things like, or ask us things like, what have you done today to involve artificial intelligence more in learning? I was born in the same part of the world where Ned Ludd, the mythic figure of Luddism, came from. And of course, what people miss in the attacks on Luddites is that this wasn't an attack on technology per se. It was an attack on capitalistic social relations that were animating it. So I'm sorry, I've done some mansplaining there. And it's a question,
it's great.
a question that isn't really much of a question. But tell me how you're handling that at the level of research, pedagogy, and also directing this new institute.
Yeah, sure. Well, that ends up being a big question. You can help maybe keep me on track here if I get lost in different. But I'll start maybe with teaching, uh, and I'll start by saying, I had a research leave in the spring, and I had some course releases before, so it's probably been about a year and change since I've had a full big class of undergrads. And before I left, generative AI was still new-ish enough that I was using it in assignments and hopefully using it in ways that got students to think about how to use it and how to use it critically. That's the hope. But I feel like it's a year and a half later now, and I'm about to go into the classroom in like 2 weeks again. And I would be very interested to see how much of a change there's been, even in just that year and a half, um, as it's become something that a lot more students relied on. I think it was the open secret that we knew students were using it, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. But it wasn't as widespread as I think it's probably going to be here. And not necessarily, I'm not saying that with judgment against the students. I'm saying, the tech world is now such that it's integrated into your Microsoft Word, it's integrated into your email program, it's integrated in all this. So I still think, though, the challenge, and for me, it's always been that way. I always use the example of like laptop policies. When I first started teaching, that was the big debate, right? Are you going to allow laptops in the classroom or not? And here I am teaching a class called Critical Internet Studies. It felt like it was an important tool to try and use in the classroom and make use of in the classroom. Now, does that mean that my classes are always these like great environments where people aren't Amazon shopping or whatever? No, I haven't necessarily figured out or cracked the code on that. But, again, hopefully, I do believe in the ability of teachers to explain like, here, this is what my policy is on this technology. This is why I want you to learn these things about it. What the students make of and do with that, I think is sort of up to them. So I can go more on teaching in a bit if we want to do that, but I'll shift now to talk a little bit about research. I haven't, yeah, actually used it a ton too much in my own research yet, other than like testing a few capabilities here and there. I had a very interesting like publication experience with a co-writer where we submitted an article and then we had to submit an AI statement, of what we used with it. And we hadn't used any AI in it, but during the publication process, they had used AI to clean up the citations. So like the press had used that. So I was curious about what they wanted from this AI statement. And of course, like I wanted to kind of make it a bit of a political statement in some ways, because I wanted to say, it's really hard to say what's made with AI these days, given that, I'm using Zotero as a software, which like involves a lot of machine learning to output your citations, or my colleague and I were writing back and forth with Google Docs and it has autocorrect, which at one point we would have called artificial intelligence. So anyway, we had this like 2.5 page AI disclosure statement that we really wanted to get printed, but they didn't, I think, find it as funny as we did. But anyway, so those have been my experiences on the research side. I am curious about how the research tools are positioning themselves for researchers, especially for researchers who feel like, the reading of the literature review and the collection of the data is the work and is the thinking, right? And so um, not wanting to outsource that because that's part of what I do, is there still room for some AI tools in that mix? And then the center, yeah, the center is a sort of fairly new center, which is meant to be a voice on campus for the humanities to participate in some of the bigger debates going on campus, trying to push AI forward, often happening in engineering and computer science and not including the perspectives of humanities. So it's really a grant that was given that provides, a number of scholars each year the opportunity to work on a project that is critically considering how AI is affecting their discipline and things like that. So it's a really exciting center. A lot of the work is being done by the fellows of the center. I'm just sort of coordinating the meetings and helping people go and hopefully coordinating some events along the way that will attract and kind of get a bunch of humanities scholars together talking about the issues that AI raises, generative AI in particular.
I work at what is often thought of as the Latin American equivalent of MIT.
Okay.
So you can imagine what that means. And we're going to be given, we are required to compete for prizes from central administration for innovative applications of artificial intelligence. Of course, I'm calling for a moratorium on it, along with millions of other people. My moratorium is principally environmentally based because the huge expansion of data centers is such an issue. Now, it's a big issue in the Midwest, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a lot of
The
pushback on the data centers here.
extraordinary alliances of Republicans and Democrats right across the political spectrum. Some of it's NIMBYism, some of it's about the expenses they're expected to provide in terms of subvention of electricity costs and so on. And some of it's about principle. I think it's an amazing political development in the United States.
Yeah, no, it'll be really interesting to see how it shapes the primaries here. I mean, it already has, but it'll be interesting to see, when November comes along. Um, but yeah, I don't think the UW has definitely been. I want to choose words properly here, but like there has certainly been an expectation and excitement around the technology, and not wanting it to be a flat out, you can't use this. And I do think that there is a lot of uncertainty around it, and there's been a lot of support for a center like mine, which is named AI and Uncertainty, to sort of start also adding some of those critical concerns to the mix. But it is hard when you talk about, you know, even integrating into the classroom, right? Like I have students who are interested and curious about it. I have students who flat out refuse to use it because they think it's bad for creativity and they think everything AI creates is horrible. And I have students who are flat out against the environmental impact It's a really polarizing technology in that way, and I am sympathetic to several of the arguments around it. And, and so it makes it really hard. I mean, I think part of the role of the director of the center, right, is to bring those perspectives into conversation and to sort of see where that adds up. But it's really hard to teach, to be in the position where you have to both teach the students how to use the technology, but also teach them like, hey, using this is horrible for the environment, and like look at the damage that is happening here, right? So um, I've been very torn with how much of it to actually include um, in my own courses in that regard.
And Prof, I wonder if we could jump off from that remark about creativity to talk about music, because you've been involved in research and public intellectual activity about recorded music for a very long time, warming to the theme of your being 49 going on 50. And lots of issues have come up about that. And I wondered if you could reflect on that in the context of your own publications and what's happening in the here and now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the themes that I've always been interested is the impact of technological change on the creation of cultural goods. And in this case, music has been one of the main ones. Podcasting is another one, software as well. But yeah, the early book, Selling Digital Music, Formatting Culture, was about, the arrival of the internet and the sort of move from music on CDs to music as a digital file um, on computers. So MP3 downloads at first, but then eventually started writing a lot more about streaming as well. And as I've continued to study the music industry over those years, you do realize that every, 5, 10 years, a new technology comes along and scares everybody. And then there's all this kind of panic and crisis. And so it's really weird to be teaching this course or my critical internet studies course at a time when AI is coming along, because a lot of the debates continue to be some of the same things that were happening back in the 90s when Napster came along. I think one of the most interesting shifts maybe has been the way that people feel about tech companies. So I don't know if you remember this from the 90s and what it was like when you first got experience with Napster, and you were sort of, if you were using that program or programs like it. Um, there was sort of a groundswell of support for that kind of thing, because at the time, like, the labels seemed to be the like utmost kind of enemy to the artist, to the consumer, and um, the model that was set with CDs and all that stuff was such that there was such frustration that a technology like Napster was kind of welcome, even by a lot of musicians, right? There were certainly some musicians who um, pushed back notably, and um, but then that ushers in this era of like Spotify, and then we realize like, oh no, it didn't help the artists as much as we thought it might. And now you have these companies like Suno. I don't know if you know Suno, but it's a US based kind of artificially generative music service. So you type in a prompt and say, hey, give me a song that sounds like, that a Spanish language song that has a beat like this or whatever, and it spits out something that is passable. And if you tweak it a little bit, you can get maybe something you actually like. But
You've just driven me down a path of iniquity, Prof. I've just opened that web page successfully. Who knows what happens next? Anyway,
who knows?
sorry to
Well, if you do
sorry to
make a
interrupt.
song with it, if you do make a song with it, please include it as the credit music for this podcast. But
Oh, and
um,
I'll associate it directly with your center.
yeah, no. Yeah, then I'll be in real trouble. Um, no, but and it's obviously it's built off a huge database of copyrighted music. It's built off a huge database of stuff that people put on YouTube. I mean, it's not clear exactly where Suno gets its stuff from. They're in court right now arguing that. But it's a technology that has a whole bunch of sort of problematic origins to it. Uh, and in some ways is very similar to what Napster was doing, right? It's trying to upend the business of music production. And yet, 25 years later, people's kind of tolerance for tech companies seems to be such that like, oh, what Suno's doing here is not right for the artist. It is not right for even copyright holders, right? There's almost more support for the labels in some ways, side of the case here than there is against Suno. So it's been really interesting to me to track how kind of sentiment towards these new technologies has changed as the music industry has sort of developed over the last 25 years.
And the way in which expressions like digital capitalism and platform capitalism and words like socialism are now sayable in ways that they weren't, as you say, in the 1990s and really in the first 2 decades of this century, other than in the careful cloisters of places like UW or NYU or the UC in the United States. And on the one hand, there is this cybertarianism that institutions have lapped up. On the other hand, there's incredible pessimism and negativity based on personal experience. But we're seeing people who are leaders historically in creativity. I'm thinking of Martin Scorsese and Paul McCartney. Scorsese is actually on the payroll of these bastards. And McCartney is ambivalent, for instance. And I think there is this ambivalence. I go back to thinking of the early days of MySpace, when MySpace was undercutting artist and repertoire guys within the recording sector by providing artists, musical artists, with the opportunity to connect directly with people, get contracts too. Now that faded away. I love it in retrospect because it is one of the great business failures of the dirty digger, the egregious Rupert Murdoch, but it had its moment that was quite important. And so that's the thing about these technologies. It takes us back to that notion of the Californian ideology, to the days of the Whole Earth Catalog, to what became cybertarianism, but always had an element that was about gritty, exploitative entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a really tough combination, and I think it's really hard to reconcile your own sort of feelings towards some of those sites, right? Like MySpace for me was revelatory at the time, right? Like that was right around when I was writing my dissertation. I also played like a little bit of music at the time, so it was the first place that I posted anything publicly online and made connections with people in other countries that we then like wrote songs together. I mean, it's like it sounds like I'm being nostalgic about the internet and what it used to be, but like MySpace was one of those kind of moments for me. It was also like a central way that I ended up finding. I used to run a podcast as well. Certainly didn't go as many episodes as you've gone. So I continue to be amazed at how you continue to do this work. But had a podcast that was about the Montreal music scene, and MySpace was a regular hub for us to find songs by artists because it seemed like a new sort of path for discovery. So I don't want to dismiss that those things were real. And, they were also always about like, okay, how are we going to sort of profit from this? How are we gonna turn this into a platform, right? And MySpace failed at that in ways that say YouTube hasn't or Spotify hasn't, right? But that's the real trick of kind of platform developments, is that they do provide these things that I think can be powerful, but they also have so many problems with them, right?
I'm interested in your take on
navigate it.
different technologies and musical quality, by which I mean sound quality, not necessarily aesthetic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking of a podcast episode I did recently with Michael Palm about the explosion of interest in records and the fact that these factories are spreading up across the United States because demand is beating supply, versus the idea that, compact discs were everything, and then the idea that online, legitimate or illegitimate, downloads were everything. At the level of aesthetics, do you have a take on this? The word that people often use about records is warmth.
Yeah. Um, so I know I wonder if this is going to get me in trouble with like the sound studies crowd. Like I wonder if you're walking me into a trap here. But I
Well,
have never been.
don't be a nice, polite liberal Canuck. Don't be a nice, polite, you know, Northern Midwesterner. Be, a bold redneck from
Right.
Western
Yeah.
Canada or from other parts of the upper Midwest. Get
Is
get
that is
those
that
things in dialogue, Prof.
is that going to get your numbers for the podcast up? You want this to be more polarizing content?
No, I don't. But in all seriousness, I'd love to know your take on
Yeah.
this, be it professorial or personal. And of course, the limits to those answers are entirely in your hands.
Yeah. No, and I think this is largely personal, but also informed just by the research I did, especially when I was looking at the ways people were reacting to MP3s and Winamp in my first book, like reading through some of the forums and the way people talked about music in this, what was then considered degraded format, right? Like the MP3 was shitty sound quality, right? Like you were taking out literally like 1/12 of the data that was available on CDs and you were making a file out of it. So audiophiles, were really staunchly against it. And I was coming into this as somebody curious about like, how do you continue to market and sell and commodify a digital file that is very different than, a physical record or a compact disc? And, you know, my own personal, like my dad, I think, was a pretty big hi-fi guy. And he was also a wine guy. And I saw a lot of like comparisons between like the way people talk about the fineness of wine and the quality of sound. And like sometimes I could hear it or taste it, but sometimes it felt like it was part of a bigger game of distinction in a lot of ways that kind of irked me. And so I've never been somebody who's required pristine sound quality. I feel like there's different moments in your life, different listening occasions, and you may want different things for those occasions. So I've always been interested in like what are the affordances the technology offers. That's going to come with some drawbacks or some sort of negative affordances. Um, and so for me, it's never been about like how do I achieve like the most purest listening experience. It's been okay, what do I need the music for, right? Like I've had very powerful experiences with music when I'm running and like I have these headphones that let outside sounds in and music. It's like I'm not getting the pure music experience, but because of everything that's going on, that's a sort of feeling you can't replicate with, a vinyl record, for example, right? So I don't know. For me, it's always I've understood people committed to high quality sound and to this kind of like pristine listening experience. It's never been my sort of approach to it. But also, I don't ever feel like my project has been to necessarily judge that, or it's been to say, look, people find joy in music in all kinds of different ways, and these are worth, paying attention to as well.
You mentioned sound studies earlier. This may be a phenomenon well known to listeners, or it may be not so well known. I worked for many years in radio. And so when I became an academic, one of the things I was surprised by, once I discovered there were things called communication studies and media studies, which I'd never heard of, was that radio was very much the poor cousin next to newspapers, film, and television. And radio just about began to be recognized when it got overtaken by podcasts in academic scrutiny and interest. And of course, during the COVID pandemic's first two waves, of which we were speaking earlier, the video podcast began to become important. And now a lot of radio interviews are actually visual, not just oral. I wondered if you might reflect on that. It is a kind of convergence.
Yeah.
Radio does become more like television. Podcasts become like a combination of the two.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and it's something I'm still struggling to figure out. This kind of new um, the, the 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 new interest in video podcasts and whether or not we can still even call those things podcasts. I mean, I guess maybe to back up a little bit, my interest in podcasting came uh, again from playing around with new technologies in the early 2000s that allowed you to sort of create stuff on your computer. Um, when I was doing my PhD with Jonathan Stern, I started a podcast about the Montreal music scene, and so I came into it as a hobbyist, and it was something I was doing, to distract me from my dissertation. Until one day, Jonathan Stern was like, "Oh, we should write, a piece together." Along with two other colleagues of ours at grad school of mine at grad school, called The Politics of Podcasting. And it was about, Jonathan thinking about the history of radio and then how does that move into what we see with podcasting. Um, so all through my time in Montreal, which is like 2005 to 2011, 12, I was very interested in podcasting from a production side of things and then had a little bit of an intellectual interest in it. Fast forward to when I get to UW, I started teaching a course on podcasting in 2014, and also started a research project that involves sort of saving some podcasts because as I wanted to write more about it, I realized a lot of the podcasts from that early stage were disappearing. So it's always been this interest of mine that's been both personal and for me, the most powerful thing about it was the RSS feed, and that's maybe going to get a little bit nerdy here. I don't know how many of your subscribers currently actually subscribe via RSS or if they just stream it on Spotify or Podbean, but RSS is that underlying technology that was part of blogging back in the early 2000s that lets you go to a piece of content or a content producer online and say, I want to subscribe to this, and then it's delivered to you via, your iPod or your computer or whatever tool you're using. And that was a sort of, to me, a very important difference between podcasting and radio in some ways. There was this sort of personalization about it, but it was also this open and adaptable thing that could be used for a number of things. Like you can literally send PowerPoint files via an RSS feed, as I've discovered with my podcast database. So it's just a very interesting distribution protocol that I thought made podcasting a kind of very exciting thing to study. Not to say that it was totally revolutionary and that every podcast was going to be this progressive, amazing thing, but it was to me a very kind of powerful underlying thing. And then to see that kind of whittled away in the platform era, which is a lot about what my second book about podcasting is about. To see that whittled away as companies like Spotify sort of downplay the importance of the RSS feed, they sort of make podcasts a lot more proprietary than they had been before, a little bit harder to access for folks, a little bit more locked into the platform. I've been really sort of, I guess, disheartened to see that as part of it. And video podcasts to me fit into that same realm. I've been having a hard time reckoning with the interest in these things because as I see it, it's just a higher barrier for people to produce. It is a something that feels more company driven because it's easier to sell ads on video content than it is on audio content. And it's something that feels just again, there was something special about that experience of radio. I mean, as a radio DJ, there's a really interesting relationship when you can't see the listeners and when you. And I recognize there's a whole bunch of benefits to video podcasts for accessibility for all kinds of other reasons. So I don't I don't want to be that old curmudgeon who's like, that's not the way podcasts were, and this is how they should be. But those have certainly been some of the tension points for me about trying to wrestle with that. And I don't know if I'm allowed to put questions back to you on this podcast, but I would be curious, like as somebody who's releasing this all the time and you're already obviously recording it on video, what stops you from making that part of the experience that you're offering, you know.
Like many of my guests, I have a good face for radio, Prof, as the saying goes. But it's an interesting point. When I began them in 2010, I wanted them to be like the BBC's Desert Island Discs program. And so I invited people to come to my loft in LA with their preferred CDs, and we would record, and I would feature 6 to 8 bits of music from these CDs until a friend of mine who was a significant lawyer in intellectual property said, the BBC can get away with it, you can't. And
Yeah.
I thought, 10% was, fair use in US terms. He said it probably is, but Warner Bros. Can hire more attorneys than you can. And so, quite conceivably, fair use doctrine in the United States is almost illimitable, but you'd have to have millions in the bank and pro bono help to prove it. So it started out very much as an audio-based thing, and in part also because I missed long-form academic discussion, albeit with personalized components. When I became more aware of the video side to these things, which is still emerging, I realized that at a personal level, I wasn't interested in watching. I'm not interested in seeing talking heads. It just has never done much for me. I'm interested in listening to what these folks have to say. So whilst I'm very happy to participate as an interviewee or discussant in these things, they're not something that I want to do. Plus, in terms of what many of my guests want, they do not wish to be seen. Some don't even wish to see themselves. So I think having exclusively audio distribution helps. Although, as I said to you in our preliminary remarks, some folks want to have a video record and they want to be able to distribute it. And that's absolutely fine with me. But I think that's where I stand on it. And it does go back a little bit to having a good face for radio.
Well, I disagree with that. I think, you'd be just fine, but I appreciate, that you're holding the line a little on this.
I wonder if we could move on to a related topic, which is important in your work, which is software. Obviously, software matters a great deal in terms of distribution, recording, experience, and so on of podcasts, for example, but also in terms of things we do every day. It's not easy, for example, to stop Chrome from using artificial intelligence to give you its first answers to queries. You can do it, but you've got to ferret around a lot to work that out. And of course, that means minimizing hugely the ecological footprint of destruction caused by Google using artificial intelligence versus simply using the internet, as it were, more generally, to find things. A massive difference in water use and power use. Enough proselytizing. Tell us about what got you interested in software distribution issues and how you've approached them.
Yeah, and I think again, it came from an interest in music. It came from an interest in podcasting. It comes from the interest in the art in some ways, because at each stage in my career, there was sort of a new technology that was promising certain things to artists or to creators, but then also including, new challenges for them to deal with. So, um, the first book was really about a lot of the software that was working in the back end to make an MP3 a kind of readable, legible thing. Shortly after that book, apps came along, like the App Store was launched in 2007 or whatever. And it took a little while, but eventually, creative artists started using apps as a way to kind of launch albums, things like that. I think about Bjork had a really interesting interactive app. And so, at each stage of whatever the the media form I was interested in, there seemed to be a new technology that was coming along affecting it. And so that's always been kind of my way into it. And it's meant I've been really interested in some of the backend stuff that software does, like the metadata that is used to describe files that then becomes incredibly important for how you find and discover things on Spotify. Um, the DRM that was, included on the early MP3 files to try and prevent you from being able to play it, right? I'm really interested in the ways that software, like you said, provides this kind of default use case scenario that is really hard to get around, right? You can download videos from YouTube. It is incredibly difficult to do so, right? Because the platform makes it such that that's just not an option that is offered to you. Whereas when MySpace was first around, everything that was up there, I think the artists even had the choice of whether they were downloadable or not, right? And so there's these kind of things that are available to you through these technologies that is often governed at that level of the interface. That has always been very interesting to me.
And I guess one of the things that a lot of critics associate with applications, even though they may use them every day, is that they represent a closure of the so-called architecture of the internet, a corporate and governmental means of shoveling people in certain directions. Any views on that?
Other than generally, I would agree, yes, that apps and the kind of platform they provide are a more enclosed way of interacting with software than what you used to be able to do with kind of a desktop computer, right? But even desktop computers have become a little bit less, I think if you look back at that very early history of computing, right, it was quite open what you could do with the machine. Um, Even in the design on the outside of things, right? You used to be able to replace the battery on your laptop if it was gone, right? But Mac now makes it kind of impossible to sort of get in there and do that, right? So there's all these different versions of uh, and stuff all done in the name of convenience, all done in the name of user friendliness, right? So I understand that for a lot of people, using it this way can be either more productive or easier or better, or it allows them to achieve more. But um, the whole interface of the phone and the way you keep track of files on it, like I still can't get my head around using that as the only thing that I work with because I just feel like a computer opens up a lot more opportunities for the things that you can do with it.
And I have one more question for you, Prof. And once you've answered that, I'd like to give you the opportunity to add anything you wish. And additions might take the form of entirely new comments on areas we haven't discussed, or traversing material where we have already covered some terrain. So my last question is that you're an enormously prolific publisher. Your research is wonderfully available in many cases online for free. The book stuff, unfortunately, less so. So because I'm in the global south, I haven't asked you about those because I just don't have access. But I wanted to ask about what all this means at a personal level, getting back to your first answers as a father, because there are these moral panics about young people and applications and use of the internet, use of the telephone, and so on. And without asking you to confide in us about what's gone on in your own family, what are some of the things you think about? For example, there are these efforts in various countries to prohibit access by people under a certain age to all sorts of things. So,
Yeah.
flawed or otherwise.
Yeah. Yes, and yeah, you're getting at the heart of like a parenting question that has like plagued my family and I imagine so many other families, right? Is what is our device policy? How do we feel about this technology? And I don't know, uh, I've got family, like my brother is on the opposite side of this, so we have two different views on it. And I don't know what the right way is, right? For us, and I think for what I approach with my classes, it's been this recognition that no matter what you tell kids to do, they're going to probably do it anyway. And ideally, you're finding ways to teach them about the right values, and the right, at least not right, teach them some values about using this stuff, right? And how to use it successfully, how to use it in a way that is creative, productive, that builds on things rather than takes away from it. Um, Whether I've actually been at all successful with that in my family, I have no idea. And I do not, your listeners should know that I am, I struggle with it in my own family for sure. But I think that's the approach generally, is that I have never felt like an outright ban on some of this stuff is
Probably
work
when you were a child,
is
Rob,
working.
your parents asked you to set the timer on the video cassette recorder because they didn't know how.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
the same time as
And
they wanted to restrict what you watched. And it's that dynamic of children and other young people as both pioneers and victims that I think characterizes a lot of attitudes to new technologies.
yeah. Yeah, no, and I mean, I was forbidden from playing video games for a long period of my growing up, because that was like the dangerous thing at the time. And, then what it meant was like, on my birthday, the only thing I wanted to do was like rent a video game system and play for 24 hours straight, which I don't think is like healthy behavior in any way, right? So, um, yeah, I don't know. I think we run into these struggles with a lot of issues in parenting, whether it's alcohol, whether it's media, whether it's um, and yeah, certainly as a teacher, just trying to have a bit of that balance and to see what my kids do with the tech. Like I've learned so much just from how they use it. They defy my assumptions in a lot of ways. They pick up things that are super interesting. They do tons of behaviors that I'm very annoyed with and I think are destructive, but they also, are able to do these things that I think are fantastically interesting and I never would have thought of doing myself, right? So trying to allow for both those things.
No, thank you for that frankness and for sharing such awareness. So to conclude matters, are there things you'd like to add? As I said, this might take the form of traversing terrain we've already partially covered, but where you want to say something else, or it might be topics that we haven't yet mentioned.
Yeah, no, I guess I'll do two. One of them is just a note. Jonathan Stern, my advisor um, at McGill, had passed away last year. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last year has been writing either as part of tributes or finding ways to work with folks that were working with him. And so I said at the beginning that that was an energizing thing in some ways. And so just wanting to sort of recognize him and to say that being able to do this kind of work afterwards has been a really important thing for me over the last year. And then the other one is a lot less heavy and serious, and it was more just a question for you because I was looking in the podcaster archives, and I think I have uh, um, podcasts from cultural studies dating back to 2014 or something like that. And I heard you mention that you started in 2010. I also heard you mention, I think on the episode with Eric Hoyt, that you have one episode of your show that is lost to time, and so I was curious what it was and like how we can help you, complete your archive.
Yes, it's interesting. I recorded an episode many years ago with Gillian Edelstein, a very famous South African photographer who's done official portraits of Nelson Mandela, for example, resident for many years in Britain. And I wrote to her years later when I'd returned to the podcast and said, "Hi, remember me? I'd love to know what you're up to now." And she said, "I don't remember you all, and I can't find this podcast." So I went looking for it, and I couldn't either. It had disappeared. It looked as though it was still present somewhere, but it wasn't. And in terms of the original recording, my hard drive had been stolen in a theft at a place I was living in at the time in North London. And for some reason, it wasn't on any of my hard drives. My internal hard drives. The external one had been taken where I think it was. So I can't find the bloody thing anywhere. I can find things saying that it exists, but
Yeah.
it's not clear to me that it does.
Yeah.
And I would love to find it because most of all, I'd like Gillian to have it so that she can listen to what she said in maybe 2013,
Yeah.
as well as what she said when we recorded a couple of years ago, and the sorts of things that had changed for her, the sorts of stories that she told that were different. And I don't know what to do. So in that sense, it's a minor thing, I suppose, but it's meaningful for me and potentially for
Yeah,
her.
of
And
course.
because she is such a renowned photographer worldwide, it's something that may well be of interest to people. But I can't bloody well find it, Prof. Uh, what I might do is see if I can send you A, the link to the recording that is extant, and B, the putative link to the missing tape.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
We'll
this is not
see.
finding an album the Beatles recorded but never released that George Martin burnt,
Right.
but it's something.
Yeah, it is. No, and it's I mean, I'm just it's always interesting to me. Again, it's part of like what motivated starting Podcaster is stories like this, right? Of folks who had either misplaced files, they had them stolen, or it was they only made one copy. You know, there's all kinds of reasons why these things disappear, and trying to find systems in which you can more systematically sort of keep that,
No,
I think is
exactly. And I keep wondering about what happens if Podbean ceases to exist,
yeah,
which is the repository. Uh, I'm in precarious employment. I am not wealthy at all. I pay over $2,000 a year to keep the podcast going, but Podbean hasn't actually increased its charges. It has made it more difficult, getting back to an earlier point you made, to include video podcasts, because obviously it would have to expand its bandwidth costs in order to do
yeah,
so. But that's not really relevant for me because I'm working more on the audio side exclusively, as you know. But I do worry about those things. And when you think about the extraordinary generosity of great US research universities, Madison's absolutely one, Austin's another, that have, I think in the case of Madison, the papers of a Hollywood studio, to give one instance. In the case of Austin, the papers of famous writers. In Iowa, it's Ian Fleming's papers. All sorts of things are there. And it's clear we need to do the same thing on the electronic front. I don't know I mean, obviously that's part of your project. So maybe we could finish by your explaining a bit about that project, and I'll include the link along with
sure.
the web page.
Yeah, yeah. So the website is called Podcaster, and that's spelled P-O like podcast and then R-E, so short for podcast research. I think that was because when I went to get the website, the actual podcast ER was taken by someone else. So we went with Podcaster, podcast research, and it's meant to be a kind of database, an index where people can research podcasts like you would research resources at a university library, for example. So if you were curious about a certain string of text and what podcasts are talking about, whatever issue happens to be the most important issue at the start of the day, artificial intelligence, right? You just type in those words and it will spit back a bunch of podcasts that are about that. It is a collection that I've been running since 2015, but we have podcasts dating back into the kind of late 2000s, I think. We actually have some podcasts from like 1942 before there was even podcasts, but they're actually like BBC radio shows that just tagged the date as as 1942 when it should have been whenever it was released. But yeah, it's got about 5 million, close to 5 million podcasts indexed there. Cultural studies is there. Like I said, I think we have from 2015 or 2014 kind of indexed there. 2015, I think, is what I was looking at this morning. It's been broken for the last year or two because research funding ran out, and we've got like a new interface that is just about to go live. So hopefully by the time your listeners hear that, the new interface will be live, but that might mean you'd have to delay launching this for another few weeks. But yeah, it should be a little bit more operational than it is currently in the next few weeks. But hopefully, folks are able to sort of locate some podcasts. If folks go there and hear about it and actually want to be able to listen to some of those files, and those files aren't online elsewhere, because the way it works right now is, if it's on Podbean, you can just press play and you'll hear it because it comes through the Podbean player. But for things that are a little bit older, for example, like your Podbean feed, I think only takes you back to 2024, maybe, because you do so many episodes. Or can you get to all of the
I,
episodes through
I
Podbean?
can get to all the ones I've looked for,
Okay,
but that's not true on the telephone application from Podbean.
gotcha.
You're, I think, episode 993, and I think it's more like 400 that you can find on the application.
Yeah, I think iTunes is the same. I looked in this morning at Apple Podcasts, and I think they have 350 episodes of your show there. So, so again,
So they
like
just dumped
depending
them
on
up
where
some point.
people, yeah, but depending on where people are accessing this, you sort of, uh, um, but yeah, so it's really meant to be that kind of a resource both for people studying podcasts and for podcasters themselves who may want, a kind of longer home for their places, for their podcasts. Sorry.
Well, great. Thank you so much for all the work you do, for your amazing research record, and also for the recent dedication to Jonathan Stern's memory and persona, and also for the carefully curated, critical but not malicious Center for the Study of Artificial Intelligence from Humanistic Perspectives. That's great. I think that you guys are going to do some fantastic things. And thank you also for getting me to think about the lost episode. But now, of course, you've made me, well, not you've made me, but I feel anxious that there are hundreds of the buggers that are lost, not just one.
No, I don't think so.
I
No,
haven't
I
looked
don't
at the
want to
other.
see doubt in your mind, but it is, again, like I said, it's super impressive that you have been doing this for as long as you have, and the range of conversations that you've covered is incredible, right? And to me, that is a massive sort of resource for the field, for people who are interested in this stuff, and so it's that kind of stuff that uh, you want to make sure you are preserving. So.
Well, again, thank you so much for your generosity in terms of both time and content. It's been lovely having a chat.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you.